الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وبه نستعين. Inshallah, we'll start this sixth talk on the Manazil Sairin, and it's entitled the stage of the valleys, or A Allawi. Valleys are a recurrent theme in most of the literature of the inner way of Tasawwuf. They feature quite prominently in the Conference of the Birds, Mantaq al-Tayr, where the birds, as they have assembled, move on to find their legendary king, the Saymurg. And as they reach towards the end of their journey, if I recall, something like 30,000 set out, and by the end there's about 30 left of them, Saymurg, 30 birds, and they enter into the final lapse, as it were, of the spiritual adventure. And it is a constant theme of gradual but relentless ascent, so that when they reach the valleys, they reach the valley of annihilation, the valley of perplexity, the valley of fear and hope. And the reason why they're called valleys is because they are both an easy route, in the sense that think of a range of mountains in which there's a valley. It gives you an easy way through, but at the same time it can be a route where you can be ambushed. It's very easy to ambush those who are inside the valley if you are on top of the commanding heights. So valleys or awdiya in the way of Tasawwuf have both these aspects, the aspects of ease and the aspects of being ambushed. Now, what does being ambushed mean in the context of these stations and stages? It is the ambush of the self that has not yet disconnected from its spatio-temporal, from its material moorings. And this self is also reflected in the work of the shaitan. The shaitan is both an external actor, external figure, but also one which pulls you back to what is more comfortable, what is more secure, and away from your goal. So this stage is to do with that. It's to do with being both a stage of ease, because most of the states here, most of the doorways, are doorways that we think we are already in, some of us, or in one way or another are no different from the normal ethical behavior or conduct of individuals who are aspiring to the good. For example, goodness, knowledge, wisdom, inner sight. These are all things that all states and has, that we believe we have in our daily existence if we are ethically minded people. But in the context of the spiritual journey, they have a different dimension. They have a different meaning. They embody the commonly understood notions of goodness, but they're also entrapments, because the self here becomes content with, if you're a good person, if you're a person with ilm, knowledge, I don't mean just outer knowledge but also inner knowledge, spiritual knowledge, if you behave with courtesy and wisdom, if you have a bit of insight into how others think and behave, if from time to time you are inspired, you might think that these are These are conditions and states that are in fact commendable and should be nurtured and strengthened. That is true up to a point. You have to be established in them and then move on. I keep on, at the beginning of each of these talks, I keep on reminding all of us, you and I, that these are stages, and they are progressive stages, they are hierarchies. So it's like a rung of a ladder. When you climb a ladder and you use one of the rungs to climb up, you don't want to go back to the lower rungs. And establishing yourself in these states and conditions, and then moving beyond them, using them as a launching pad or as a platform for the next phase in your journey, is what these talks are all about. These talks are not a static description of individual states which you may or may not have. It's a dynamic process, the end result of which is to be in the presence of oneness and to see oneness before, after, and above all things. So, as usual, Ansari has when he starts each of these stages, he has a kind of summation at the beginning as to what all this is about. And he says, this stage is termed that of the valleys, since most of the aspects of journeying and appropriate conduct are undertaken within it. Exertions are recognized, as are the efforts of the intellect, but so does Satan find in it a playground. There are dangers and risks in this stage, because of the prevalence of ambiguities for the mind. The plotting of Satan finds its foothold in it, and were it not for the divine support, the guidance of the law and the sacred proofs, most sojourners would have stayed in it without ever leaving. But Allah guides with His light whomever He wishes. وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَهْدِي بِنُورِهِ مَنْ يَشَاءُ. My commentary on this introduction is that this stage is deceptive. As I said earlier, the qualities of goodness, knowledge, and so on are self-evidently commendable. You don't have to make a case for them. But many seekers become sort of ensconced in these stages, especially if they become an effortless extension of yourself. You know, you're a good person. I'm sure all of you are good people. I'm sure all of you have a degree of higher or lower degree of inner sight and spiritual knowledge and wisdom. But in the journey, if you're satisfied with that, then you're satisfied basically with where you are. You do not want to go beyond that. That this is a level of awareness with which you're content. But it's insufficient to continue on the journey. They are, in terms of wayfaring, doorways that open the gateways to other stages and other manazil. And you should see them really as halting points. You should not see them as the way in which you conduct your outer affairs. They are commendable ways, undoubtedly, and they should govern the way that you interact with yourself and with outer realities. But you should also give them this other dimension, the dimension of being a platform for moving on. The first doorway is the doorway of ihsan, goodness. And he starts with the ayah, هل جزاء الإحسان إلا الإحسان. Can the reward of goodness, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, هل جزاء الإحسان إلا الإحسان. Can the reward of goodness be other than good? Ihsan, of course, is a central element in tasawwuf, and I'll talk about that later, inshallah. Ansari defines it. He actually doesn't define it. He makes the definition part of a prophetic hadith, which defines ihsan as to worship Allah as you were to see Him, which is the act of witnessing. And he says it has 3 degrees. There are 3 degrees depending on your own level of accomplishment. The ihsan of qasd, goodness of purpose. And he says, by grooming one's purpose with knowledge, by seeking it with firmness, and by purifying it. Ihsan fil ahwal, 2nd degree, goodness in one's condition, which is to jealously safeguard it, cover its essence with integrity, and to correct it when necessary with verification. And lastly is goodness in time. But by time he means the goodness in sequence of states, not just the progress of time, which is never to allow your witnessing to diminish, nor to dwell on your concerns, and to make a beacon of your journey to the truth. My commentary on that is that goodness, ihsan, is actually a multifaceted word. It encompasses nearly all the virtues. If you ask what is tasawwuf, it is ihsan. And it comes from the hadith of where the Prophet ﷺ was asked by the Archangel Jibreel, what is defined Islam? What are the aspects of the deen? And ihsan is one of the 3. Iman, ihsan, Islam. Ihsan is the path of tasawwuf. It's the inner way that connects the outer rituals, the outer aspects, with the way to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's the bridge between the sharia and the haqiqah. It is the way of the tariqah. So by its very nature, any way encompasses all the milestones on the way. If you travel on the road and you see milestones, they basically mark out the way. But the way itself is the way of ihsan, the way of goodness. And the why it is that is because the way that it has been defined in the prophetic hadith, it is the state of the abd, the state of the person when he or she are witnessed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the act of Allah witnessing you in itself embodies the totality of goodness. And if you act with that knowledge, then it stands to reason, as it were, that this kind of knowledge drives you to the good. So the purpose of goodly acts become infused with the knowledge of the haqq, or the truth, constrained as they are by a degree of adab or courtesy. And everything that comes from the good is necessarily good, but we partake in it as carriers of it, not as its originators. So when you are on the path of goodness, you are reflecting one of Allah's attributes, which is the good, the all good. And with this kind of knowledge, that your goodness is not because you are somehow a more moral person or more ethical person, that definition of goodness destroys the self-centeredness associated with one thinking that he is a goodly person, because the origin and the source of it is elsewhere. So goodness, like all acts of virtuous acts, in order to be tools and aids along the path of reaching a sense of oneness, can only do so if they're seen to be emanating from their source, from their origin. And knowledge of that, the ilm of that, is really essential, which comes to the second doorway. So the doorway of goodness leads to the doorway of ilm, or knowledge. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وَعَلَّمْنَاهُ مِنْ لَدُنَا عِلْمًا. And to whom we from on high have brought knowledge. Ansari defines knowledge actually in very modern terms, I would say. In fact, in scientific terms. But of course, his knowledge is not scientific knowledge. He defines it as knowledge rests on evidence and the removal of ignorance. It sounds very much like Karl Popper. That this is any kind of empirical knowledge that has truth in it in its outer form is to do with evidence. and it's to do with testing, and to do with verification or falsification, as the case may be. So Khawaja Ansari, through his insight, through his brilliant insight, has identified the nature of knowledge well before the empiricists. Of course, here he doesn't refer to outer knowledge. He's talking about inner knowledge, which also has the same rules. So the outer knowledge, which we all think is true because it is based on evidence, it's based on testing, it's based on verification, or more likely falsification. We think of it as the basis of all the material world. I mean, it will be very hard for us to ride on an airplane, for example, which is not designed with this kind of knowledge. I mean, if the engineers who have designed your airplane or the engine have decided that, well, no, they will not use empirical evidence, and they will not use theories or hypotheses that have been not denied by evidence, I don't think you'd ride on that plane. Similarly here, the inner knowledge is subject to inner evidence and inner witnessing, and that removes, of course, the veil of ignorance. There are three degrees, the normal 3 degrees of Ansari. Firstly, it is clear knowledge that is obtained by sensory evidence or a correct deduction or established verifiable routine. He uses deduction rather than induction, which is really very important in terms of establishing the veracity of the process of confirming knowledge. That is, you go from the particular to the general, not the other way around. So evidence to him, spiritual evidence, is based on an accumulation of confirmable, experiential encounters, rather than from a grand theory. There is no grand theory of tasawwuf. So it is an evidence that is painstakingly accumulated. Of course, in the inner world, the painstaking part of it can be instantaneous, especially if you have the second or the third degree of knowledge. The second degree of knowledge is hidden knowledge that emanates from spiritual exercises and righteous actions, and is manifested in one's inner secrets. It is a knowledge that reveals what is hidden, absents the witness, and gathers in what is scattered. I think experientially, I would say this type of knowledge in common experience is a knowledge associated with I don't call them ecstatic states, but states wherein the constraints of reason fall away. And these, of course, can happen in certain instances during devotions, during dhikrs, and so on, where a kind of certainty emerges by the dissolution of the bounds that contain you. And the third kind of knowledge, of course, is the highest knowledge. It's the knowledge from on high. Its proof is its very presence. That's why you can never talk about it. And being aware of it is to know its truth, with no veil between it and the witness. And this is a type of knowledge that is given mainly to very, very few people, and to realized beings, prophets, awliyas, imams, where it is not, I mean, I don't think you can sit and question some of the realized beings, prove it. They would not talk about this kind of knowledge. It is a knowledge where there is no veil between, or there's no ambiguities. And this to me is one of the key propositions in tasawwuf, is that the entire scheme has to have in it a sense of hierarchy. You have to understand that there are these degrees of knowledges, and there are barriers between them. That is, you cannot use your empirical knowledge, your knowledge of the first degree, to suddenly understand the nature of knowledge of the third degree. You have to be prepared you have to be conditioned, you have to be molded to be able to be receptive, to take on. And the kind of knowledge that we think of as the only one that makes sense in the material world is in the hierarchy of knowledges of tasawwuf is of the lowest degree. It is a knowledge that comes from empirical evidence and sensory experience. Mind you, it is not a knowledge that you have to throw out of the door simply because there are other grades. This is an essential form of knowledge if you want to deal with the world. You can't deal with the world simply because you are in a constant ecstatic state. It doesn't work. This we should not therefore denounce it or denigrate it. Tasawwuf does not imply the complete denial of the rules of the outer world. The rules of the outer world are governed by outer knowledge. It has its own truth, but it is circumscribed by higher forms of knowledge, which the mind or empirical evidence almost by definition cannot understand. That's why I think it's very futile to sit and argue with people about spiritual realities exist or not. Because the plane of argument, the plane of discussion, is the plane of empirical evidence. And there's no empirical evidence for it. None. I mean, you can roam the world and try to test it. It doesn't exist. And any attempt to do that is something futile because it requires different rules. The second form of knowledge, though, can be derived not only from these special states, but also from action that is always driven by ethical purpose, by a moral end. And this is Ansari's second level of knowledge, but generally it is the second level of knowledge in most spiritual traditions. And it introduces the idea of a dynamic framework to knowledge. Here it is, you cannot divorce knowing with acting. So you can't be a person in ihsan or goodness if you don't actually act it out. You can be theoretically a good person, but if that's not experienced through action and through interaction, then it becomes basically inert. It's something that has potential energy rather than some kinetic energy. Of course, the highest form of knowledge is entirely by lutf. It is not something that you can work for or strive for. It is the one that comes by qadf, as the Quran says, by hurling into a receptive vehicle. And this is the knowledge of prophets and realized beings, and that's why it cannot be subject to proof, because its origin, its source, is from the unknown, the unseen. And of course, knowing that is a form of wisdom in itself, which brings us to the third doorway, the doorway of wisdom or hikmah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. قل هذه سبيلي أدعو إلى الله على بصيرة أنا ومن أتبعني. He grants wisdom to whomever he wills, and he to whom wisdom is granted has been granted abundant good. Ansari's definition of wisdom actually is extremely profound and succinct. Wisdom is the name given to the rules of placing things in their appropriate place. Very simple, very, very true, very deep, very profound. To know where to place things is not that difficult. To know where to place things appropriately is very difficult. It is of 3 degrees. The first degree of wisdom is to give each thing its due measure, not to exceed its limits, and to hasten its being. The second degree of wisdom, to see the truth of Allah Most High in His promises, to know His justice in His commands, and notice His righteousness in His constrictions. And the highest form of wisdom, to reach inner sight whenever you deliberate, to utilize the truth in your advice, and to achieve your purpose whenever you allude to matters. Wisdom, therefore, is not really simply, as I said, where to place things, but rather where to place them appropriately. The wise person does not go beyond his or her limits, nor does the wise person usurp the rights of others or rush things into being. So an element of appropriateness must always be there. And as that becomes sort of embedded in your spiritual DNA, as it were, you begin to see the wisdom in all of the actions. The wisdom in the sense of seeing the perfected outcome of all your actions and the actions of the world around you. And you see behind them and ahead of them Allah's bounty and love. And Allah says in the Quran, you may hate something, but then you may find out later that it is good for you. And you may love something, and it is in fact harmful for you. Modesty is knowing the bounds of wisdom, is itself a form of wisdom. So if you recognize the limits of your capacities, and that your wisdom is not overarching and embraces everything, you're not a wise person in each matter, it gives you a sense of proportion and humility. And the final stages of wisdom is where the discerning faculty, the capability within a person to exhibit hikmah, wisdom, merges with inner sight, basira, which has another range of qualities, and is the next doorway. So inner sight has in it the element of wisdom. It covers it and goes beyond. I prefer inner sight to insight. Insight has a different. It is basically an onrush that allows you to see things in a flash. Inner sight is the reverse of your outer sight. So as you need eyes to see the outer world, you need inner eyes to see the inner world, or the world that is hidden from outer sight. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هذه سبيلي أدعو إلى الله على بصيرة أنا ومن أتبعني. This is my way. I call to Allah clear-sighted, I and those who follow me. The other ayah, I think I read the wrong one. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, regarding hikmah. يؤتي الحكمة من يشاء ومن يؤتى الحكمة فقد أوتي خيرا كثيرا. Ansari says inner sight is what saves you from perplexity or hira. We talked about hira as a station before. It's like, when you see an entirely new landscape, you can immediately take in its shapes, its contours, its major features very, very quickly. And the outer sight gives you that ability. With sight, with vision, you can immediately take in, as it were, your surroundings very quickly and size them up. Inner sight does the same thing, and rather than be confused by what you see, be uncertain, you can see sharpness and so on. With inner sight, the hira, the perplexity of being in this unknown universe is removed. Ansari, I think, from time to time in his stations and Manazil, brings us back to one aspect which we may forget, or not forget, but we may not give due credence to, or due weight to, which is that you have to be anchored in the law. All this is fine and dandy, but you have to come back to the Sharia. And without the devotional practices, without commitment to the law, the sacred law, the whole process becomes at best theoretical or self-serving. This is a package, and you can read, as you can read Ibn Arabi without reference to the Sharia, but it will be incomplete, it will be insufficient. And Ansari, from time to time, he throws out these things to stop people from believing that they can create their own rules of the game. So inner sight requires to know that the manifestations of the Sharia emanate from an inherent source, and that you relish its certainty and safeguard it with alacrity. You might ask, well, what kind of Sharia? What is the specific Sharia that he's referring to? I think it's commonly understood what we're talking about here, that you can't really embark on a path of inner enlightenment without outer bounds and constraints. And the constraints on this path is that of the Muhammadi Sharia. Secondly, to witness the justice and the guidance or otherwise that comes from the truth, to witness the righteousness in its diversity, and to draw close to it as a means of reaching the divine presence. In the third stage, your inner sight overwhelms whatever remnants exist of your material connections in trying to understand the inner journey. So it overwhelms knowledge, confirms the signs from the unseen, and from which grows spiritual acumen, firasa, which is our next doorway. My commentary on this stage is that, contrary to what some might believe, inner sight is not possible without constraining oneself by the commands of the sacred law. The acts of devotion and affirmation of oneness are a necessary requirement in the launching stage of achieving inner sight. They are the anchor for the maturing of inner sight. And the second stage of the evolution of inner sight is the ability to see the perfection in all the manifestations of diversity that are a feature of creation. Behind them all are the actions of the One. The full flowering of inner sight is when the person affirms continuously the presence of oneness beyond signs, symbols, or evident knowledge. At that point, everything dissolves, of course, everything. But to get to that point, you have to know where you came from. You don't reach your goal, your sanctuary, on a leaky craft. The doorway of inner sight leads to the doorway of spiritual acumen, firasa. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن في ذلك لآيات للمتوسمين. In this are signs for those who scrutinize and reflect. Ansari defines inner sight, spiritual acumen, is to reach a decisive conclusion without sensory confirmation or relying on testing and experimentation. Really, it's remarkably, it's not modern, it's in fact postmodern. It's a postmodern understanding of very, very subtle realities. He thinks, clearly, Ansari thinks that acumen, spiritual acumen of firasa doesn't happen to the ordinary adept. And he says that many times, not only here but elsewhere. So the lowest degree of acumen is sudden and infrequent. It might occur once in a lifetime, asserting itself because of the dire need of the seeker for it and for its benefit. So if you're a sincere adept, if you're a sincere seeker, and you need to know, I mean, the word I call it spiritual acumen, other translations, a bad word, is clairvoyance, but that you enter into occult nonsense. So it's a better word, I think, spiritual acumen. Sometimes you need the aid of the unseen as a matter of emergency, and this is when it can happen to you. You don't know how, you don't know why, you don't know. You make a decision that turns out to be spot on. And it has no relationship, he says, to the knowledge or insight of the person. You just get it when you need it. You may never need it, but when you need it, you will get it. The second stage of acumen is an acumen that appears from the depth of truth, the vigor of one's state, and shines with the light of unveiling. This happens, to several people, I think, to those who are even not that far advanced on the spiritual path. I wouldn't put it in this specific manzil. I would put it earlier, actually, because the capabilities, I think, of reaching inner sight are much greater now, perhaps than they were 1,000 years ago. I mean, some things have retreated and degraded. Other things have, by and large, I think, the insight of realized, or people on the path of realization now can quickly generate this capability. And I think I'm confirmed in that by the prophetic saying that, be wary of the spiritual acumen of the true believer, for he or she speaks with true insight. The last stage of acumen, of firasa, is where you actually see into things all the time. But of course, this is independent of your sight, your speech, or any illusion. You can see into the heart of people quickly. That power, of course, can be abused, I want to add. I mean, some people have that power, have that capacity to see. You've always remarks about people with mesmerizing eyes and how they can see into your soul. And certain figures, for example, kids are always frightened or wary of people who can appear to know what they're hiding. That power of spiritual acumen has in it a very dark side, and this is where one of the tricks of these valleys. That's why it's in a valley, actually. I changed my mind. It should be in a valley because it is where the self or Satan can give this power without the responsibilities that come and without the constraints that come. And many people who have abused that power, you can see the results of it around the world. This fellow Reverend Jim Jones, any of you remember that, people mass suicide in, I think, in Guyana, 1979, where 800 people killed themselves. He apparently had this very powerful way of drilling into people. He had firasa, but he had a diabolic form of it. So the one with that capacity has to manage it with great skill and great reticence. It's not something that you should do, because it can hurt people and can frighten people. Of course, the best antidote to that is exaltation, which is the next word, which is ta'zim. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ma lakum la tarjun Allah waqara. Why are you not in awe of Allah's majesty? These values, you're sort of jolted back into something that may bring you back from the edge. Firasa can take you to the edge. You have to bring you back. It's also very, very important, salutary, I would say, to know that by ta'zim, by exalting Allah, His attributes and His qualities, you are, by implication, reducing or shrinking the space for the lower self or an outer force, diabolic force, to take over your being. Knowledge of Allah's exaltation implies one's abasement in front of it. Abasement again is I can't find a better translation for تذلل. I don't know, Mahmoud. If anybody, an Arabic speaker, can find, because abasement is a kind of in modern language kind of groveling. It's تذلل is not that. تذلل is a kind of retreat and acknowledgement rather than lying flat on your stomach.
Like a follow, to be behind.
Yes.
Follow. Know that something is
Yes.
leading.
Yes, but it's not the way that you abase yourself but I've used abasement here. If you can come up, any
Will it not overlap into humility and humbleness?
It is in it in that, but it is not the it is an abasement in front of a greater force rather than a sense of your own worthlessness. But once you recognize that your worth is linked to a higher source, then the nature of abasement changes. Anyway, I've used it here. It's of 3 degrees. To exalt the commands and prohibitions by not opposing them with barely acceptable justifications, or to dishonor them through excessive zeal, or to place on them impossible conditions. To exalt the commands, 2nd degree of ta'zeem or exaltation, to exalt the commands from those who wish to distort or replace them, and to defend them with knowledge. And the 3rd degree is to exalt the truth, so that you affirm that there is no cause, reality, or choice apart from the one. By its very nature, when you exalt the attributes and qualities of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it pulls you back to the median path. The wayfarer seeks no excuse, even when allowed, to distort the intent of the commands and prohibitions. So you don't end up in hair splitting. You don't end up always finding the line of least resistance. Line of least resistance is not necessarily the best line to follow all the time. So it is the path, the medium path, the path of caution, of prudence, especially when it comes to divining, understanding the intent of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When this principle is applied to the broader realities beyond the self, it is not to confuse apparent benefits or license with the intent of the law. I give an example here. For example, the prohibition on intoxication does not give you the right to consume intoxicants below the point of drunkenness. That's not the point. This is in fact a way of denouncing or rejecting the rationalist interpretations of Quranic unveilings. For example, when you say, pork meat was banned because it has been proven scientifically that it has high amount of parasites. It's not the point. It is not your job to divine these commands or prohibitions. Your job is to understand them in a way that is commonly accepted. Intoxicants is an example. Even if there seems to be a justification for limiting or altering the commands. Thank you. Thank you very much. For example, doing your prayers, the command to do prayers, is not subject to time and place. You can't say, well, it's I'm in an office environment, and if I start praying, people will start pointing at me, and I'll be a sore point of contention. You can always retreat to a corner. You can always do it in a different form. But you may have the license to do it, but exalting the command for prayer means that you have to give it priority over the circumstances. Now, it doesn't mean you have to make a hue and cry about it. I mean, or do it in an exhibitionist way. But you have to understand that there is a priority, that there are certain aspects of it that cannot be wished away. You can do it, but in ways that cause minimum disruption and minimum of reaction. The next doorway is a doorway of ilham, or inspiration. Said one who had knowledge of the book, I shall bring it to you before you blink your eye. Ansari says inspiration is the state of those who are advanced on the path. It is above the stage of spiritual acumen, as acumen may occur only rarely, or its expression could trouble the wayfarer. Inspiration, on the other hand, can only occur if one is on a firm foundation. He divides it into three categories. The lowest form of inspiration is one deriving from a live source, confirmed by hearing or not. He has a tendency to, I think it's partly to do with his Hanbali environment. He was a very strict Sharia minded in many ways, and sometimes, as you'll see later, he gives a physical understanding of what could be subtler realities. But he has obviously a very, very strong point when he does that. So when he talks about ilham, inspiration coming from a live source, he actually means that. It means that a source outside of the person can provide inspiration. It can be an individual, it can be a sound, it can be a movement, it can be an onrush, and you can confirm it or not, but it is an external source acting on the individual. Inspiration from a visual source, as long as it does not cross barriers or bounds. And the last form, or the highest form of inspiration, that comes from the heart of verification and speaks to the authority of eternity. My understanding of what he's saying, and my own comments on inspiration, it's that in the spiritual realm, when you say that you're inspired, what it really means is that it removes uncertainty. It's not that you're inspired to do something, or that you're inspired to higher acts of I don't know, literature or composition or whatnot. It's you cut out uncertainty in your actions, and you established the truth of the matter. So you establish the truth of a condition by removing everything that is uncertain, that can affect your understanding or your engagement with that issue. It is a kind of energy, a subtle energy. It galvanizes the self and overwhelms the intellect, this inspiration. There are various kinds of inspirations. There are khatirs, what I call khatir, or flashes. I'm sure most of you have had flashes like that. These are, if they're from a true source, open up doors to you. Or there can be a warid. A warid is like an ongoing breeze, as it were. It's a kind of low-level flash, but a continuous one. And these are the two forms of inspiration, I think, that most of those that have experienced it talk about. But it does not abrogate this. You can never be inspired in the spiritual path to do things that abrogate the laws and commands. You cannot say, well, I'm inspired, I've gone beyond the stage of doing this or that requirement. You cannot do that. That inspiration is false. And that is why, again, these valleys, this stage is called the stage of the valleys, has in it this element of trickery. And it can never push a person into doing, true inspiration can never push you into doing something that is in itself a transgression. Of course, at the highest level, it becomes a state of permanent unveiling. you see the thing and its meaning at the same time. You witness both. You can see that frequently sometimes. Usually when you're trying to size up people, but also events, also circumstances, and it's really very important to dwell in this valley for some time, because it's a very important tool to have in weighing and measuring the outer world. Events, when seen with the light of inner sight, take on a different dimension, because you remove yourself from the daily hurly-burly. It's like, you're either, if you're in the middle of a battle, for example, or in the middle of a melee, you're too busy trying to maintain your balance, you're defending yourself and so on. As you move up, the whole thing takes on a different dimension, and its true meaning becomes evident to you if you're sitting on top of a mountain looking at people fighting and shouting at each other, and situating them in a broader context. So it allows you to deal with also, that state allows you to deal with the outer world in a much more effective way, and allows you to weigh things and measure things properly, so that you don't get carried away by events, whether they are the Arab Spring or the election of Tony Blair or whatever. That you see in them the sort of the long cycle, the long durations in which their meaning manifests itself, and that gives you serenity or sakina, which is the next doorway. It is He who sent down the spirit of serenity into the hearts of the believers. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. هو الذي أنزل السكينة في قلوب المؤمنين. Unusually here, Ansari gives no definition, and I think because of this, he has, as I said, from time to time a tendency to materialize what seems to be a subtler reality, and he does that here. The first level of sakina or serenity, he specifically relates it to the serenity experienced by the Israelites that came from the Ark, from the Tabut. And it's very unusual to see a definition of what is a subtle reality somehow embodied in what seems to be an outer force. But he does see it. He gives room for the embodiment, as it were, the physical embodiment of serenity. So his first stage is, he says that the serenity for the Israelites that were given it in their ark, it is akin to a breeze with a human visage, and he means that, so it's not metaphorical. For their prophets, it is a miracle. For Yusuf and Yaqub alayhi salam, these are miracles. For their kings, a sign of their impending victory. It puts fear into the heart of their enemies when a mighty sound emanates that terrifies the enemy as the Israelites face them in battle. For us who have now between us and these times, there's a long distance, and we think that our minds and our perspectives have evolved, and we cannot conceptualize the reality of a breeze with a human face in it. It becomes more difficult to accept this specific interpretation. But I think as you reach the sort of the axial age, the prophetic age, these events took place with far greater recurrence, and we should not be that dismissive that these, what we think of as subtler realities, cannot have an external aspect to them. The second degree of serenity is what emanates from the tongues of those who have the veils removed. It is not something belonging to them, but one of the subtle graces of the truth. It imparts wisdom to the tongues of the realized ones, and is the breeze that transports revelation to the hearts of the prophets. In some ways, he sees, for example, or he visualizes that Jibreel, the archangel Gabriel, when He imparted the revelation. The breath that came out of Jibreel is the breath of serenity. So it's, if you can sort of take a spiritual photo of it, you can actually see it emanating. It allows the realized ones to speak with the eye of truth, preserving the inner secrets while exposing the false or dubious ones. The third kind of serenity is the one that I have described, which is, it is a breeze that descended on the heart of the Prophet and the hearts of the believers. It is something that combines light, force, and spirit. So it has a set of components that make it up. The fearful one is becalmed, and the sorrowful or angry one is consoled. The transgressors, impulsive, and prideful ones are contained. He then goes on to discuss the other type of serenity, which I think we would feel more familiar or comfortable, which is the metaphorical serenity. The serenity of spiritual dignity, he calls it, is often the mark of the realized ones, is the shine that derives from the last kind of, from the breeze that descended on the believers with the Prophet ﷺ. And that type of serenity also has 3 degrees. The serenity of humility, when one performs devotional duties with presence and exaltation. The serenity from correct transactions, when the self is made accountable for its actions in dealing with creation and the truth. And the serenity out of which grows contentment with what has been allotted. This serenity never descends except on prophets and saints. My commentary on that is that Ansari understands serenity as an active agent in the world. It is not an intangible state that is associated with the spiritual condition of the Wayfarer. It is a specific force from the subtler realities and takes different expressions with different groups. And this is, by the way, is the kind of serenity that's also seen in the Abrahamic religions. The Jews or Israelites call it the Shekinah. And it is the same force. If you read, well, I don't know if you ever read Eusebius on the battle in which the Emperor Constantine was aided by the visage of Isa alayhi salam. It also talks about this kind of force that descended on the battlefield. So the force of Sakina, the force of serenity, to the ancients, let's call them that, is a real tangible force. I think it's probably ended with prophecy or with the cycle of prophecy, so it will not be manifested in time anymore. But Ansari clearly connects this kind of force with the element of prophecy. So we are unlikely to see the 3rd degree, as it were, of serenity now, or ever experience it. So we should stick to the metaphorical one, the serenity of spiritual dignity. With a higher form that encompasses serenity is tama'nina, or assuredness. And Ansari here quotes from the last ayahs in, I think, Surah Al-Fajr, the ayatu nafs al-mutma'inna, O self at peace. It is a degree of evolution of the self, and the spectrum of the self that you may have come across before, in the cosmology of tasawwuf, as it were. You start with the lowest self, the commanding self, and then you move up to the blaming self, nafs al-lawama. Then you move to the inspired self, and then you move to the self that is at peace, secure, assured. Then you move to the self that is contented, and then the self with which Allah is contented. So, and if you look at it as a spectrum, if you reach that point, you're quite high on the dial. So, he says, assuredness is serenity understood in the spiritual dignity sense. Serenity is strengthened by true security. There are 2 main differences between it and serenity. Firstly, serenity can be sudden. If you see it in the physical form, it is sudden and can lead to becalming, while assuredness is a secure presence in which the self can find repose. Secondly, serenity can be itinerant with the person, can come and go, while assuredness is established and irremovable. Even the Prophet ﷺ went through periods where there was no experience, no revelatory experience, and he became very agitated. That's when the ayah came, Alam nashrah laka sadrak, or Duha, I don't know, one of them. So it can be in and out, the type of serenity experienced by prophets and walis and by the ancients. Assuredness, on the other hand, is, he says, is assuredness of the self by the remembrance of Allah. It is the assuredness of one who is scared, needy or afflicted, knowing that his or her condition will be alleviated by recourse to the one. You don't ignore your condition, but you know you have a solution to it. You know you have an outlet to it. The second degree is assuredness of the soul. Here I think he means the self, because he speaks about the ruh, but in more, the ruh cannot be assured in our understanding. It's the self that needs to be assured, so it's a different terminology. Assuredness of the self in its purpose of unveiling, his desire for what is promised, and in its drive to be ingathered. And then lastly, assuredness when seeing the subtle presences, knowing that ingatheredness is the way to eternal being. My commentary is that assuredness is a higher form of certainty, because it is a permanent condition inside the Wayfarer. It's not subject to these itinerant conditions and in and out conditions and so on. I say it is also sui generis. It is within the person, in the sense that it is an established inner condition, rather than one emerging from an external force. It is therefore more stable than sakina. It is the necessary condition of the self, because it gives you firmness, firm assuredness, and sure footing. And it is also the force that connects the opposites. It's like the sort of the spiritual nuclear force. It connects fear and hope, contraction and expansion, beginning and end. And it is whenever the subtler realities emerge, this force of assuredness or certainty, assuredness and certainty, that's probably better. And it connects the desire of, or the drive of the self in this path to be with the eternal presence, with its own effacement. So it's the force that reconciles opposites. It brings opposite principles together. And lastly is the gateway of himma, of concern, solicitude, diligence, called in fact also diligence. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ma zagha al-basara wa ma tagha. The eye neither veered nor overreached. Ansari says concern or himma is the force that propels the believer towards the goal without let up. It's this relentless force that pushes you on and on and on. It's of 3 degrees. Concern or himma that fortifies the heart, indwelling in annihilation, and pushes it to desire to stay in the eternal. Second degree is the concern that pushes one away from immersion in causes and towards work and trust and hope. And lastly, concern that lifts one beyond states and conditions and away from attributes towards the essence. So this spiritual solicitude, diligence, concern, all these words are really insufficient to translate himma. It's the ever-present drive of the real wayfarer. It's what keeps you going, pushes you on and pushes you away from what is passing, what is temporary, towards what is permanent and what is true. And as you go along, that force also changes its nature. It's like a stagecoach going on. It moves, and you see different landscapes as you move from one valley into the next, from one manzil, from one station into the next. You have only the goal, which is the haqq, the truth, in front of you, and you basically ride roughshod over everything else, over the tricks of the self and the pleasantries of these states and conditions. These states and conditions can in themselves be very pleasant to dwell in. It's an ever-striving force that channelizes your spiritual energies towards the permanent and real. And obstacles and impediments vanish, and the drive towards the one is relentless. It's the Newtonian force that pushes you on and on. It's like a force applied to a body without friction. If there's no friction, the body will continue forever. And the stronger the force, the more it can overcome friction. And friction here is all these tricks and all these pleasantries and all these. So, relentless onward. Once you remove the himma, the ball tends to stop, because there's nothing that's completely frictionless. I think with that we have ended the sixth discourse, and inshallah if you have any